This is a video I wasn't going to make, and to be honest, there's a strong possibility it still might never see the light of day. It is, I suppose, really my own thoughts of, can you separate art from the artist? Specifically, when the artist in question is one of your favorites and turns out to be actually a bit of a fucking monster. I am, of course, talking about Neil Gaiman. Like I said, I wasn't going to talk about this, but on a few occasions on my channel on the past, I have mentioned that I am a fan of Neil Gaiman. That's a phrase I won't be using very much anymore. As a Terry Pratchett fan, one of my favourite books that Pratchett wrote was Good Omens, which he co-wrote with, you guessed it, Neil Gaiman. So as a Pratchett fan, Good Omens was my introduction to Neil Gaiman, but after that I did read some of his other stuff, like American Gods, and Anansi Boys, and all of Sandman, and At the Ocean at the End of the Lane, and Coraline, and actually just about every other bloody book that he wrote. So you could say that I was a Neil Gaiman fan, and it was probably easier to not say anything. But then there was that tweet by former seminal author turned internet troll J.K. Rowling saying, "The literary crowds that had a hell of a lot to say about Harvey Weinstein before he was convicted have been strangely muted in its response to multiple accusations against Neil Gaiman from young women who'd never met, yet, as with Weinstein, tell remarkably similar stories." And J.K. Rowling may have chosen a weird hill to die on social media in recent years, but she's not wrong, because you know what, it is way easier to to point to someone that you kind of didn't like to begin with and say, haha, see, he's a monster. It's not quite so easy to do that when it's someone that you actually have genuinely admired, and unfortunately not just genuinely admired their work, but based on the public persona of that person, admired them as a person as well. So this isn't the first time I've found myself in this particular position. It's the first time I've found myself in this particular position since I've had a public platform where people I don't know actually take the time to listen to the stuff I say. But, up until a few years ago, I would have said that one of my favourite films was The Usual Suspects, the film directed by Bryan Singer and starring Kevin Spacey. I don't say that often out loud anymore. And when I was a student, I went to this local club to watch a gig of 4 rock/metal bands, and of the 4 bands that were there, the only one that stood out was the third one on the billing, which I'd never heard of before, but it was obvious even then that there was something about them that was going to take them much further than little clubs around Wales. And I was right, it wasn't long before that band was appearing on MTV, and I got to be one of the obnoxious gits who says, well, I got to see them before they were famous. The band I'm talking about is a band that doesn't exist anymore, and it's called The Lost Prophets. The reason it doesn't exist is because of the crimes of its lead singer, whose name I'm not going to say out loud. And if you don't know who The Lost Prophets or their singer is, then I encourage you to stay in that ignorance, because however bad you think the things that this person might have done were, I can guarantee you they're a hell of a lot worse, and you really don't want to be reading that shit. And I just want to be clear, this is not woe is me. I'm not a victim here. I'm just an old guy who doesn't get to enjoy something he used to enjoy anymore. Can you separate art from the artist? Um, I mean, as readers of books, we do. We've done it for years. Charles Dickens, one of the greatest writers in the English language, and by all accounts, an absolutely horrific husband who, when he decided he wanted to be with another woman instead of just divorcing his previous wife, decided to write articles in the press describing her as an unfit mother and mentally unstable and things like that. Nice guy. J.D. Salinger, the author of Catcher in the Rye, his correspondence with teenage girls, if he was doing that on the internet today, that would be described as predatory and grooming. Ernest Hemingway, a literal spy for the KGB. This is a guy who, during Stalin's era of the Soviet Union, looked at him and thought, you know what, I like the cut of his jib and I want to be able to be a part of that. Apparently he was an absolutely crap spy, but, he still tied his colours, he still nailed his colours to that particular mast. Speaking of Soviet Union, George Orwell was so anti the Soviet Union. The guy who was anti all the authoritarian regimes and anti Big Brother and all of that. Yeah, he literally wrote a list to hand over to the British Secret Service of writers that he thought might be subversive, which, has been pointed out since that was fairly heavy on the Jewish, gay and people of colour side of that list. Roald Dahl, beloved author Roald Dahl, was not shy about the anti-Semitic stuff that he used to say. William Golding, author of Lord of the Flies, literally attempted to rape a 14-year-old girl. And we know that this happened because he literally wrote down that he did that. And yet we still read all their books. I think the big difference, though, is reading something like Lord of the Flies now is not actually showing any support for Golding. Because Golding's dead. He's gone. He doesn't benefit from sales of that book anymore. He doesn't get to, get the attention from people talking about that book. But Neil Gaiman is still there. If I reviewed a Neil Gaiman book on this channel and talked about it, then someone might then want to go and buy that book. And Neil Gaiman would benefit from that. And Neil Gaiman would get some level of validation and support just by virtue of the fact that there's someone out there talking about him and encouraging his books to be read. The horrible thing is, it is perfectly capable to be not just a good author, but an author who projects kindness and compassion in the things that they write, and that not be the person that they are in real life. So while at some stage his writing might get a reappraisal, Gaiman the man, I don't think is going to get one. And for those of you out there who are saying, well, he hasn't actually been convicted of anything. He hasn't, while many people have described potential crimes that he has committed, he hasn't had his day in court. He hasn't been arrested. He hasn't been charged, and he hasn't been found guilty of any of these. For anyone who saying that, I'd just like to draw your attention to this little statement here. On a day like today, it's worth saying, I believe survivors. Men must not close our eyes and minds to what happens to women in this world. Wise words. That was said by Neil Gaiman in 2018 at the height of the Me Too movement. So yeah, the evidence, even though it's still only in the court of public opinion, does seem fairly overwhelming. And suffice to say that, barring some miracle, I won't be talking about Neil Gaiman on this channel ever again. I'm certainly not going to buy any books from Neil Gaiman, and the ones that I have, I don't know. I can't see myself reading those again. Certainly in the near future, probably not in the medium future, and possibly not in the long-term future either. I just want to finish by saying that my admiration goes out to his victims. Coming forward with something like that cannot have been easy, but what they have done may have prevented other women from suffering a similar fate at his hands. They're the ones that kind of deserve the attention now, not him. But anyway, like I said, I don't know if I'm going to post this or not. If I did, thank you very much for watching, and I promise the next thing that you see me talking about will be much more positive, and more than ever, take care.